All right, so thank you all for joining us today. I'm David with BCX Design and also more recently with Happily.ai. My work has been with the behavioral science world. A great deal of my efforts have been to understand how various businesses across cultures can work together and how product teams can design better for far off customers. And today I am joined with Jayanth Kolla, the founder of Convergence Catalyst and Sensate Technologies. We are going to talk today about the future of technology in our new COVID quarantined lockdown world. Jayanth is probably one of the foremost authorities on the technology world, particularly the deep technology world in the Indian subcontinent. He's got great exposure around the world, and I really can't think of anybody better that we could talk to learn a little bit more about what Startup India is doing and what technology is doing to adapt to our changing world. So Jayanth, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Dave. It's a pleasure, man.
So here's my thought. Like, we're going to be somewhat more casual in the approach, but I don't think our listeners are going to want to listen to us for 45 minutes, and we can talk for that long.
Right.
So what I thought I would do is I would break up today's discussion broadly into a couple of parts. One is a little bit more high level, and then which is about what business is doing and what challenges business in general is facing in the technology and the startup world. And then the second piece of the puzzle will be to drill into the people working within those companies to learn about challenges that they're facing with these new remote work environments, changed business environment, and then we'll talk a little bit about what you see changing in both those high level and sort of micro levels.
Yeah.
So does that sound reasonable today?
Perfect.
Awesome. So let's start with a fairly straightforward, big topic question. So technology companies have product roadmaps that often go, 18 months, 2 years, 3 years out. And
yes.
I would say technology companies are famous for learning how to move quickly and how to pivot when circumstances require it. I think the agile environment is probably one of the hallmarks of technology world, but with things changing by the day and so many experts and pundits weighing in to give their opinion on what the world is doing, what have you seen? What are product technology companies doing to adapt to this?
Clearly, one common denominator that I see, technology companies doing, and the smaller they are, the agile they are, in this particular aspect is they are all trying to, move to the must-have category, when it comes to positioning their solutions or making changes, to be it at a feature or functionality level or even at a positioning level, of their products and solutions, not be in the nice-to-have category to move to must-have category, right? I see product companies, tech product companies trying to get a sense of, how the post-COVID world would look like. What would be the, priorities for their, customers and customer segments. They're doing a lot of scenario planning. They're looking at emerging trends. They're trying to align themselves for some of these emerging trends. And like you said, things are changing literally on a daily basis. It's extremely difficult to model, but it's, it's fairly in a reasonable way you can plan for various scenarios, right? So one common thinking that I see across product companies, big and small, is to essentially fine tune their products at the engineering level, or definitely at a positioning level, to fall into the must have bucket, depending on how their consumers or customers priorities are going to change, post-COVID lockdown and in the post-COVID world.
So how do you approach that? I mean, I think all of us have largely thought around this space. There are industries and entire industries today that we would say are quite essential to our ongoing existence. But I would say the majority of industry and business today, at least in this month, would probably not be in that must-have or essential services category. So
True.
for businesses that were sitting in that nice-to-have category, and as they stand back and say, okay, what do I do? How do I become a must-have? Have you seen any interesting approaches that businesses have been taking to do just that?
Yes, I am actually seeing that, and like I mentioned, it's the smaller companies which are that much more agile, which are able to make those changes, because clearly decision making is fairly easier and faster there, right? And especially technology companies. I've actually seen some of the tech companies even get their act together and actively participate in in the current COVID crisis itself, come out with their fine tune their solutions to mitigate, or to help the governments tackle this COVID crisis in some or other way. So I've seen that kind of agility, and I've seen companies, I mean, with our own company Sensate, where our first set of products out of the market are in the sports tech space. We've got back to the drawing board. We changed our positioning, and that led to changing changing the product proposition, features and functionalities, including who's going to be the economic buyer immediately soon after post-COVID. You and I talked about this offline, and you're aware of some of those discussions. But yes, those are the kind of changes that I'm seeing, especially health tech companies. I've seen health tech companies like Day to Day. I mean, it's a post-operative care company which has worked. Its 100-member team has worked for a week and changed their proposition to offer to the big hospitals and the governments the post-operative care for COVID patients. I mean, in case of COVID, the positively tested patient needs to be quarantined for 14 days, right? Anywhere between 2 to 14 days, and needs to be observed. Now, the big thing that we are observing, especially in a country like India, is most of these guys who are under quarantine conditions in quarantine facilities are getting bored, and there have been cases of people running away from hospitals, right? So this particular company came up with a solution to keep these patients engaged for all of their quarantine period, thereby reducing the pressure on the frontline health workers. Okay, not getting them as much exposed. There's this another company that I'm working with. They're still in a pre-MVP phase. They are a NLP AI based diagnosis health diagnosis chatbot, right? And they had built this basic platform, and in the last 3 weeks they built a layer over that for COVID, and they are actually getting people tested through a survey, through a bunch of questions, through an intelligent chatbot, and giving out results in terms of probability of people having a coronavirus or not, right? So they changed their platform that way, and they sent it out for a few had sent it out to a few hundred people to check on this. And the feedback that they got, not just people testing positive or negative, or having high probability of being testing positive for coronavirus apart, they are getting a lot more feedback in terms of what currently in the lockdown phase, what are people suffering with. So that what led to as a potential solution for the current crisis, then extended to these guys actually prioritizing some their next thing on their product roadmap. So something that was on their product roadmap priority at number 8 all of a sudden moved up because of this COVID solution that they came up with in the last couple of weeks. So these are some of the innovative really agile movements that I'm saying. I work with another industrial IoT company. They offer sensor-based, it's called HackLab Solutions. They offer these, sensor-based safety and security solutions for big manufacturing plants, assembly plants, the the big in the big industries, right? In even in the current lockdown scenario, their solutions are being used because most of their customers are in the essential essential goods manufacturing space. So be it pharma, or the disinfectants manufacturing, the soaps, the FMCG, all those manufacturing companies are using their solutions, and they have got back with some more requirements which this team spread across sitting at home is designing for right now. So I'm seeing all these kinds of innovations happening by the tech companies to start with. They are trying to get into the must-have bucket, or of their customers. What and I'm seeing that some of the smaller bootstrap companies are able to do that much faster as compared to the bigger companies, because wherein the decision making is that much more democratized, and in the matrix based structure.
So to kind of bring it back home, I do have a couple questions. I'm not going to let you just get away with all that big data download like that without asking a couple more things. But if I can summarize, what you've largely said is very agile companies are looking at who is now the economic decision maker, who is the new influencer within a company, and they are reprioritizing roadmaps based on features that these new buyers or perhaps change power structures within a company might require. So let me ask a validation question in here. We've all, or many of us, have sat down and made personas and built product roadmaps, and we validate our assumptions today based on our instinct, based on what we've had with an organization quite often. But if we're to truly understand who our buyer is, and that they really are going to behave the way that we think they will in the next month, 6 months, year plus, what do you recommend? How do you validate your assumptions if you're going to change your product roadmap? Because sometimes changing your product roadmap can be extraordinarily expensive and high and require a great deal of effort.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So before actually going ahead and implementing, the changes that you have made on your product roadmap, it always, makes sense to test it out with with at least a small sample of your target customers and consumers. And there's a big, what if there, big scenario planning that ought to be done. And that is essentially the length of the lockdown, right? Everyone realizes that our life and our world, even at the most macro level and at the micro level, is not going to be the same. There are some changes, okay, and we know that certain changes are going to be permanent, right? But what those to what extent those changes are going to be permanent is going to be a function of for how long is this lockdown environment going to continue in different markets, right? So if the lockdown is out in the in a few weeks, right, life could return to normal in 6 months time, right? Then when you change your when you make changes to your product roadmap or your positioning roadmap, you have to have a dual structure saying for the next 6 months, I'm going to be focusing on this, this guy in the value chain, and he's going to be my economic buyer. And 6-8 months later, I get back to my original plan, right? So therein, the changes are not as much on the product road. I mean, full-fledged product, as much as they are on features, but most changes are actually on the positioning side of it, right? Whereas if the lockdown continues for a longer time, or if the lockdown would continue for a few months with intermittent on and off, a few weeks on and few weeks off, then we are expected to see some longer permanent changes at the consumer behavior, societal behavior, or even if you're a B2B company, your customers, your clients' priorities changing for a very, very long time, if not permanent. In which case, your changes on your product roadmap, your solutioning have to be deeper. And this is scenario planning, right? For both the cases, it makes sense for you to get in touch with your consumers or customers, and lay it out to them. When you're doing it basis your persona and basis your instinct, test it out to them, with having calls such as these, Zoom calls, or send them across your thought process, your changes, and get feedback, and then potentially act on it.
So it's a beautiful explanation. Scenario planning, what if planning, Monte Carlo simulations. You can be as sophisticated as you want in this kind of effort. I think the question that some of our listeners might have is, how much is too much in this space? We can scenario plan for weeks, months if you want. Right. Obviously, there are businesses to run and people who depend upon us, customers and employees. How long does it really take, do you think, to do this kind of exercise?
I think the senior management, the CEO plus the second rank who reports unto him, should dedicate, in the current scenario, a good 20 to 25% of their bandwidth, time and energy, right, to continuous scenario planning. I think for the next few weeks at least, this is going to be a continuous scenario, right? That they need to be in this mode. It's going to be a part of what they're going to be doing. I cannot give you for how long they should do it, or there's no stop here, but it's a continuous process, and the senior management of the executive team should allocate a good 1/4, 1/5 of their bandwidth only for this, okay, for the next few weeks, at least until the first lockdown version gets off, and we don't know if the second order effects are coming in stronger or not.
Well, that's perfect. I was hoping we'd get some kind of clearer guidance from you today. So 25% of your time on continuous scenario planning.
Yes.
Spend time looking at your product roadmap. There could very well be opportunities for you to bring forward some items that were further down the roadmap, because it's possible that in the current situation and as it evolves, that economic buyers might change. And most importantly,
and the decision-making criteria would also change.
Absolutely.
What was important for them pre-COVID, is not as much.
And so, like any other scientific effort, test your assumptions.
Absolutely.
We know our buyers. We think we know our buyers anyway.
Right.
But chances are, if we pick up the phone, send an email, grab a market research firm, whatever it is, get in front of your buyer, get in front of the influencers, get in front of the stakeholders, and test your assumptions. And in the meantime, we just keep testing and scenario planning, and we'll find a way. So it sounds like the tech world is powering through in the ways it knows best, which is encouraging and awesome to me.